that makes sense. Think of the package of things that someone coming out of prison. I mean, Jeff's comments, I was thinking to our study while you're saying this. So he says he can't find a home. Well, who hasn't, I've been living in prison for the past 10 years. That's not a very good reference for a landlord. He says he lost contact with his family members. Very common, right? Where do you go to stay? Where do you don't produce a reference for a job. You don't have identification. You can't get a credit card. All of these barriers. So if you give somebody a little bit of money, right, it's probably not going to do the trick. It's not going to buy them a house. If they have a family, it's not going to be able to set them up. I mean, it's a substantial amount of money you're going to need to have somebody whose life is so fundamentally unmoored be able to put them in the right direction.
I want to take the woman who's holding the mic. We'll come back to you, Jeff.
Good morning. My name is Bridget Lorera, and I'm really here to give a voice to Jermaine LeBron. He can't be here because he's on death row in Florida. He was born and raised in New York City, and he followed the woman down to Florida when he was 20, and he was involved in a murder when he was 21. He's going to be 40 this year. He continues to be on death row. He recently lost an appeal. I believe he was wrongfully convicted. In fact, in one of his trials, the jury found that he was not the shooter. And of course, the group of people, the 7 other people that were involved in the crime, 2 of them got plea bargains and testified against Jermaine. Jermaine was a black Hispanic from New York, and the rest of them were native Floridians and white, and so it's no coincidence that they kind of chose him to pin the crime on. And, he has a multitude of injustices, and it's wonderful that there's organizations like the Innocence Project, but they only help cases where there's DNA. And in this case, there's really not any physical evidence that Jermaine committed the crime. He was convicted on the testimony of other people involved in the crime. So I guess my question is, are there any organizations that I can contact that would help Jermaine? Because right now, the clock is ticking that he could be executed, because last year, Florida passed the Timely Justice Act where they want to speed up the executions, and they actually executed 7 people last year.
Thank you. Does anybody?
He doesn't have any lawyer?
He does have a lawyer, Mr. Mills, who's been his court-appointed attorney since 2010. I was subpoenaed to go and testify for him because I knew him as a child. And
why don't you speak to one of us afterwards? We can point you in. We can point you in. There definitely are some organizations that he should reach out to.
I would like to say that when his last appeal was denied recently, it was in the paper, and it happened that I went down to visit him February 1st. His lawyer still has not contacted him that he lost his appeal. And if you know anything about the legal system, there's always a clock ticking. He wanted to file for a rehearing, and he only had 15 days. And he writes letters to his lawyer. I email his lawyer. His lawyer has responded to me once in 4 years.
So thank you for bringing that case to our attention.
Thank you.
Suggest you talk to one of the panelists afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
And Crystalline, would you give the gentleman the mic?
Good morning, panel. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm going to give you my background. I'm going to make my question and give you my answer, and then look for your answer. Okay? And my compliments to Honorable Eric Schneiderman for having made a basic reform or solution to put forward to the governor. I mention that because I have reforms before the governor dealing with environmental matters and in connection with our electric company and gas company. I teach here at John Jay College occasionally on computer applications and public management, so I am a techie. And we are in the information age, which I like to remind people because of the fact that our institutions are in need of reform. What is the root cause of these injustices is my question. My answer is our monetary system, the one that we're born into, among other outdated institutions. Thank you for your patience.
Who wants to take that? What is the cause?
I don't want to answer the question because it would take another hour and a half to answer it fully, but, and not that these are the only answers, but the Innocence Project has an extensive website with tons of information on it about the causes of wrongful conviction and the percentage that each cause constitutes. So I encourage you to look at that. And I will just say that the two biggest causes are wrongful identification, misidentification, and false confession. And then there are a myriad of other reasons in addition.
Well, and I think that there's another phenomena that I've noticed in my, kind of travels with Jeff and others talking about this issue, which is that we seem to have a general societal discomfort, if not strong aversion to talking about this. And I think that it's worth, each of us kind of giving some consideration to why is that? I mean, my speculation is that it terrifies us to think that the system in which we invest so much faith and that has so much power makes, these mistakes on whatever frequency. The data that I saw suggests that perhaps 4% of convictions on violent felonies are wrongful convictions. So I don't know if it's that we just don't even know how to wrap our heads around a system that does injustice in this kind of way, but I think that there has been a lack of kind of conversation and willingness to engage around the topic. But perhaps that's changing too, because the New York Times has done a rather remarkable job of showing a continued kind of attention to wrongful convictions and exonerations, and does a nice job of, of showing the continuity of their attention to it so that you can see patterns. Joe.
And I was remiss in support of the equal parenting folks out front. I'm all in favor of those folks that were protesting today.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joe Williams. I'm a former correctional superintendent for over 30 years. I ran Fulton Correctional Facility, which was a work release facility for violent and nonviolent offenders. And then subsequently I ran Lincoln for nonviolent offenders. Now the difference there was that Governor Pataki put in an executive order disallowing violent offenders into the system, into work release. Now there was a question about—
And just for clarification,
yes, ma'am.
We're talking about people who've been convicted of a violent crime, not who have somehow been clinically assessed as showing patterns of violent behavior.
Absolutely, right. Governor Pataki's rationale for that was that he thought there should be even more punishment and that violent offenders should not be allowed into a program which kind of rewards them. And he thought he was protecting the community by doing this. He never asked me, by the way. He should have. I'm also an adjunct professor here at John Jay. The question really is, and I think, the reforms that folks have been talking about in terms of the exonerated persons, wrongful convicted persons, definitely needs to be dealt with. And I do believe that they should be given some kind of interim assistance by the Department of Corrections until, because the fact of the matter is that the court said they were innocent. So the Department of Corrections should prepare a reentry package which would take them to the point where hopefully they would get their compensation. But what I want to stress is that in the interim, there needs to be something for those pains of imprisonment, that Gershman Sykes talked about, because once you're in prison, there is going to be some deleterious effects, no doubt about that, all right? And there was a question here about a person that had been in Greenhaven prison, for example, who was eligible for the conjugal visits, and then they went to Otisville, and then the conjugal visits were no longer available. One of the things that is available is the temporary release program, okay? That's on the books, all right? And the rationalization for why they kept it at in maximum security prisons, conjugal visits, was that those inmates were not eligible for temporary release. Once you go to a place like Otisville, however, you do become eligible for temporary release, all right? And there has not been enough pressure. And of course, probably the reason why this particular inmate didn't get it is because he was noted, maybe, I'm just speculating, as a violent offender. If he wasn't, it's even more egregious that they didn't allow him to keep his family together. So I'm just saying that we should put some pressure on the governor and on the Department of Correction in terms of enforcing the temporary release program, which would mitigate some of the deleterious effects of imprisonment.
Thank you, Joe. Next, Liz, and then the woman on this side. Liz is the woman who's standing.
Liz Gaines Osborne. On the sort of when people get out or how they do, I don't think that we or any of the reentry organizations would ever not want to provide services, and we could. And in individual cases on getting ID or doing resumes, the issue for us has been that exonerated people actually don't like coming to us because they're in groups of people who they feel like aren't like them. And much of the work that gets done in treatment and reentry programs is really about an adjustment that it really doesn't kind of work, even though they would always be welcome in any of our programs. What I'm wondering is whether if this piece of legislation gets through, that there would then be potentially subsequent funding or support through the legislature, and whether any of you would be working on that, so that almost everything we do would be useful, but it would have to be almost on an individual basis, which is a more expensive way of providing services. You made an interesting point about peer work and things like that. I actually think it is effective for people to work in groups, but there's just not enough exonerated people to do group work. As a social worker, I'm wondering if you have a model for how you think organizations that do reentry work could be, and either of you, how we would better do that, because there's no reason we wouldn't accept people and get the IDs and do all those things, but we would need your kind of input on what would the model look like, and how much would it cost, and who would work on getting it to happen.
Well, let me just quickly say that, I've worked with Osborne before, we've met, but I'll say that, your organization is very progressive. Fortune Society is not every, just so everyone's clear, every prisoner reentry organization is not willing to do that. I was turned away by some places, so I don't want anyone to think that that's across the board. So I just want to mention that part of it. You want to speak to the model aspect?
Sure. I wish I knew how to solve this problem, because it is a problem. There are not enough exonerees to constitute a huge lobby of people that are pressuring the government for X amount of funding for X amount of activities. It's a relatively small group compared to the number of people who are coming out of prison in the general reentry population. But that said, I believe that at places like the Fortune Society, like you, they will take exonerees into their services. However, it's my experience that they will have to treat them the same as all of the other people that are in the system there, and that is because of their funding, and that is because of their general rules, and whatever other procedures they have in place. And those are the sort of things that our clients will balk at. For instance, at Fortune Society, at least in my experience, everybody has to be drug tested to go into their housing program, and regardless of whether you have a substance abuse history, and if you don't, that's not a good thing, you know? You have curfews, you have things like that. And so for people who've been exonerated to say, I have to go by the same rules that people who actually did commit their crimes go by, it doesn't allow them to be recognized for having been innocent. And so I understand why the Fortune Society and the Osborne Society have to, you know, do what they do, but if there is a way to take them out of the general population, and if there is a way to assign them a counselor separate from everybody else to work with them and to take them through the ID process, to take them through the job application process, and to shuttle them by the place where they have to provide the urine in a cup or whatever, they don't have to do exactly the same thing that everybody else is. And while people bristle at treating some population differently, I think that's what our exonerees are looking for. So in terms of the group counseling, in Texas, they had a social work professor there who developed a great model for group support there, because they have a lot of exonerees in Dallas. And these guys are buddies. They talk to each other all the time. They call each other all the time. They support each other through marriages and divorces and everything else. You know, there's a cluster of people here in New York, in the New York area, in the tri-state area, and I don't know why the same model doesn't work here. I think probably it's because, maybe because I don't know actually what the answer is. Jeffrey, maybe you know more than I do about why.
No, I'm sorry. I promised people would be out by 11, and I promised her that she'd get to speak. So I'm going to cut it off with people wanting more. No, right behind you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Deirdre Sinnott, the director of the documentary 23 Reasons Why 23 Years is Enough. And my question is there any move to put the class of people who've been non-lethal defendants who were convicted of murder under the felony murder rule, who I believe in a lot of instances are also wrongly convicted because of overzealous prosecutors, into this sort of pool of people who are considered wrongly convicted?
Trying to get a mic that works here. I'm just going to speak loud. Sorry. The answer is no, that's not the case. I think that you're kind of ahead of the loop, you're cutting edge. I think that you could probably be a catalyst for opening that discussion. What type of ultimate responses that you get, who can say? I think it also comes down to what the individual facts of a case are. I mean, frankly, if somebody has agreed to be a getaway driver of a robbery, and then an unexpected murder happens, and then they're charged, if that's the fact pattern, you're really not going to get a sympathetic audience in the innocence movement. On the other hand, if it's just more of an association where a spontaneous crime happens and you just were with the person and you were not engaged in any other crime, those are the type of cases that I think that your effort to try to have included, I think you have some legs there, and on that aspect of it, I would be in agreement with you on that.
So before I close, do either of the lawyers on the panel want to comment on her question?
Well, it would be a factual basis, and you know the situation he described certainly could be an appeal, an effort to demonstrate that the person was not actually guilty, because acting in concert requires some act towards the accomplishment of the ultimate goal. The person driving the getaway car who knows about the robbery, you're going to have difficult time getting any sympathy in that case. Although, you know, personally, I really think the people who are charged with felony murder should not be given as severe a sentence as the individuals who actually commit the murder. The mere fact that a person is there and they know there's going to be a robbery, and then someone is killed, and I've seen judges in many instances give 25 to life. They give the maximum to these individuals, which really is, I think, an injustice.
Thank you. So thank you. I hope you'll join me in thanking Attorney General Schneiderman and the panel, Jeff, Karen, Evan, and Seymour, for sharing their time with us today. And I want to thank all of you for sharing your time with us. Thank you for coming to John Jay. I hope to see you at future events.